Welcome to the Oh So Spurs podcast. You're probably hearing names like Eze, Kudus, Xavi Simons, Semenyo and Mbuemo, but which ones can we actually get? Well, you're going to find out today, and you're also going to understand why Spurs' squad situation is pretty complicated and it's not quite as simple as just trying to get them all. And to help me with it all is the wonderful addition to Oh So Spurs. It's Max, who is a data analyst and a fanalist. Great to have you on, Max. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be here.
Great. And look, we're looking forward to diving into the research you've done and all the brilliant data you've built on our website, which we'll link into the top comment of this video. So make sure you check that out if you'd like to see a list of all our transfer targets for the year, ranked by feasibility and the status of the squad. Max, shall we start with the status of the squad? This is very important for people to understand, right? It's not quite as simple as going out and buying Xavi Simons. There's homegrown and club-grown quantities we have to meet effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really difficult, especially on the UEFA squad list. Obviously, we saw some difficulties with that in the Europa League squad this year. We had to kind of leave out the likes of Jed Spence at the beginning of the season, and then pull the likes of Timo Werner in the midway point of the season just to get Jed Spence back in. So it's a lot of chopping and changing as far as UEFA is concerned. For the Premier League, we're in an okay position. Players like Kevin Danso, who are not obviously English, declaring for the English national team, still have homegrown status, but similar players don't obviously apply for homegrown in a UEFA context. So yeah, while we're kind of in the clear on the Premier League side, we're pretty much right on the cusp, if not a little bit over, as far as what we can allow in our Champions League squad, which essentially means that we need to prioritize homegrown signings where possible, which I think we've been able to see in some of our marquee signings in recent seasons. The likes of Solanke was obviously a combination of Premier League experience and then also getting a homegrown player that'll start week in week out in our team. But yeah, as I said, it's pretty much going to be can we get a couple out the door before we bring in especially a non-homegrown marquee attacker.
Well, what we'll do now is we'll display on the screen, you'll be able to see a list of our current status by competition on the brilliant page Max has built for us. But the rules are that in UEFA, you have to have 4 club-trained players, 4 homegrown players. You can have 18 non-homegrown players as well. And in the Premier League, you can have up to 8 homegrown players and 17 non-homegrown players and unlimited under 21 players as well. Is that right, Max?
Yeah, and it gets kind of complicated with UEFA because, essentially the more homegrown and club trained players you have, it basically allows you to have a bigger squad as a whole. It really kind of pulls back the depth that you can bring into the Champions League if you don't have that kind of maximized quantity of club trained and homegrown. So it's a tricky one.
Well, let's start with one of those homegrown players on the list, Eze. What do you think of his links, Max? Is he a good fit for what we need, and how does he impact the dynamics of the squad?
We obviously, I think any Spurs fan who's been involved with transfer rumors in the past, few seasons, even as far back as his QPR days, and Spurs have obviously really liked Eze. He's an unbelievable player. He's a get the fans on their feet sort of player. He's obviously an attacking midfielder, but he kind of features off the left. For England, he's played as a pure left winger. But especially this season and last season under Oliver Glasner at Crystal Palace, he's kind of playing as like a left-sided number 10, dropping in deep to receive the ball and then kind of looking to link up with like Mateta and the other forward players that Palace have. So yeah, he's a brilliant player. Obviously, the question mark with him is we have Maddison as our sort of starting number 10. It'll obviously depend on, whether we opt for like a 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1 with Frank coming in. But he is kind of, it would be our biggest signing being made in a position where we already have, like, one of our best players is already occupying that position. So it's really a matter of, if we believe that the minutes that he could take up on the left side or minutes that he could combine with the likes of Maddison and Kulusevski would make it worthwhile.
And Max, what about the stats behind Eze? What's he like on paper?
Yeah, so I mean, you can really see what I'm kind of talking about in terms of his on-paper stats. As far as he's really high in his progressive passing numbers, but he also has really a really good take on numbers, really good dribbling success rate. So even though he's not really spending that much time on the left, he's got a pretty significant increase on likes of Son with his take on success rate. Son this past season, obviously completely misprofiled in my opinion as far as being put on the left touchline, but he had just under 40% successful take on percentage, and as is closer to 50%. So, even though he's in more central areas, you'd imagine that still putting him out wide, as we've seen for the England setup as well. He could still play make out there, but he can also still kind of beat his man, get to the touch line or cut inside, depending on how the system is set up in our attack.
Yeah, I think he's the one a lot of people are most excited about. People say he's Tottenham, whatever that means. But I think they mean he's got a bit of flair about him.
Yeah.
He can beat his man. He can score a free kick, and he's got a bit of swag about him. That seems quite appealing. And you can't really quantify that, but it sounds like the numbers do kind of say he's a good option for us to be considering. Although we'll caveat this with the challenge that Palace can command a large upfront fee for him, which is the tricky bit as clubs try not to do too much of an initial outlay and stagger the payments of players over a longer period of time.
Yeah, it's like a £68 million release clause that, obviously isn't easily broken up. So yeah, it will be difficult. One other thing I also wanted to mention on Eze is I think the team really lacks kind of like ball retention. It's obviously that Spanish term like pausa, right? Where you put your foot on the ball and slow the game down. I don't think we really have that, to be honest, especially in our front line. That comes from not having as many 1v1 threats, and also just players who have a really good understanding of the game, some more experience, and I think he would really bring that. I think that's actually one of the main pros that we would get out of bringing him in. And also, as far as settled possession, he's great, but then Crystal Palace do so much work in transition. We probably remember the FA Cup final goal, the quick back to front play that I think we'll see a lot more. I mean, we had a lot of counterattacking goals last season, but I think that'll increase even further under Thomas Frank, especially as we're kind of getting our feet under us with the new system. So yeah, I think he really covers both bases as far as the system goes and what he can bring to the team.
And what about Kudus? That's another player that we've been linked quite heavily with. Why is he on the list of marquee targets, do you believe, for Spurs this season?
Yeah, so Kudus a little bit more recent, I would say, than like Eze, who's been more of a long-term one. But it's really no surprise, I think, as to why Spurs are looking at him. He's extremely versatile. He plays primarily off the left. Obviously Bowen taking up the right wing spot. But since Graham Potter's come in to manage West Ham, he's kind of played as either a striker in a three-back formation or as a dual, like a strike partnership with Bowen. So I think you've seen with we'll obviously get into Mbuemo in a little bit, but the way that Thomas Frank has set up his attackers typically at Brentford, that pretty much covers all the bases that we would need. It would almost be like a player who has somewhat of an understanding of basics of the system already, which would be great. So yeah, he can play really anywhere across the front line. He has really high take on numbers. He's got just over 3 per 90, which is like the 97th percentile. We need help against low blocks. It's like always such a painful watch when Spurs are playing a team that just sit back and crowd everyone in the box. And as much as I like Brennan Johnson, obviously I love Brennan Johnson, but he can fade in and out of those sorts of games. In my opinion, he's not really a ball to feet player. Whereas Kudus, you can kind of say, pass the ball to him and make something happen, kind of break the defense and help us, get through those sorts of teams.
Yeah, it's the likes of Johnson. Funny, like we take these data-led approaches these days, and there's some players which really divide the fan base in the sense that they are top of all the data and all the stats as fantastic players, and the stats can lie, but you can't hide behind the importance of goals. And if players are scoring a lot of goals or preventing a lot of goals, they're obviously adding value in some respect, but they don't often pass the fans' eye test, which is another metric which does sound unquantifiable, but it is still important. You kind of need a mix of the both, don't you? But any more stats on Kudus that you wanted to mention before we move on to the next one of Xavi Simons?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like overall stats, he's kind of had a drop off as far as just like goals and assists season on season. He had 20 goals and assists last season. He's down to 9 this year. So, I mean, he's played 10 less games this year, but I do think that he's maybe slowed a little bit, especially with the kind of chopping and changing. And West Ham are obviously just really poor this past season. There's an argument that that almost serves to benefit us with his stock just being a little bit lower than it would have been after last season. And so the extra dimensions that he can add, also being a left footer on the right side, we obviously have Kulusevski for that, but in my opinion, we'd want to move him permanently into central areas, giving Porro a partnership on the right side that can cut in while he kind of provides those overlaps. I think would be super beneficial, especially like I said, versus the low block teams.
Cool. So he has value to add against those sides which have struggled to kind of break down in the past. So what about Simmons then? The next one on your
list. So Simmons is,
he's
obviously
a popular one. He's going to be expensive.
Yeah.
So is he worth that money?
Yeah, he's a weird one because I'm not going to pretend like I know every detail of the deal that Leipzig and PSG have done, but he had been on loan at Leipzig and then went there permanently in I think January for like 70 million euros, like a ginormous fee. Per like Fabrizio Romano and other journalists, with a view to still move on in the summer. So you'd imagine they're paying that fee in hopes that they'll make a good amount of money on it, which you're already at a really high price point. So yeah, but with that, caveat added, I think Xavi Simons is one of our best opportunities to get a real X factor player. A lot of these other options are great. They have Premier League experience, but Xavi Simons he's I think the youngest option on this list. He's only 22, so he has so much growing to do. He's taken giant steps since his PSV loan, then to Leipzig. He's just kind of growing exponentially. And if you watch his goal catalog, it's like it's a joke. He's the kind of player that a game hangs in the balance, he'll pick up the ball and make something happen, and kind of like Eze get the fans on their feet. I think he actually is probably the closest comparison on this list, just positionally. Xavi plays as kind of like one of those, like a left-sided 10, relatively close to Šeško, the Leipzig striker. I have written down that I think he's probably added about 20 million to Šeško's price tag for Arsenal or whoever gets them, just because of how many assists he's put on a plate for Eze over the course of last season. I think Dominic Solanke would be a big fan of this signing just because of the extra service he would get. But yeah, the question mark is he's a little bit weaker physically than Eze. He's just a smaller player. So you wonder, putting him in central areas, would that cause any issues? But I think we need, a higher ceiling to the squad as far as our technical level. And, the guy like flashes up on every metric. His pass completion is really strong. He's got close to 6 progressive passes a game, which is like a joke.
What's like normal? Like a 6 progressive pass is a lot then, which is like the 80th percentile, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super high end. And yeah, he's a hard worker off the ball as well. He's got good numbers as far as his tackling and his kind of presses per 90 as well. So yeah, I think he's a young, hungry player. If we can get him in and the wages aren't out of reach, I think this would probably be the biggest statement signing we could make. It's a little bit higher risk than the likes of Eze as far as, Premier League sample size. But yeah, I think especially in those Champions League games that are decided by just a couple moments, it's the kind of player that our squad really needs.
And Semenyo is an exciting player we've heard about. But just quickly capping off on Xavi Simons a second. He's not homegrown. And I think that's important just to recap on some of these players, which ones are homegrown and which ones aren't. Xavi is not homegrown. Eze is homegrown. Yep. Kudus, is he homegrown, Max?
Nope. No,
Kudus is not homegrown. And what about the next person in Semenyo? Sorry, he is homegrown.
He is, yeah. So he represents Ghana, but he has been he's born in the UK, born in London, and he spent as far as I know, his entire career in the football league. So
because this is it, it's nothing to do with your nationality that makes you homegrown or not.
Yeah.
It's all to do with how many years you spent at an FA registered club before you hit a certain age.
Yep.
So there's lots you could quite literally have been playing in Australia, other end of the world to the UK, and not have a drop of English, in your family tree or passport wise in your family, anything like that. You may have never even been to England until, you got signed up by an academy in any sense. You might not even speak any English. That's absolutely fine. It makes no difference at all. it's all to do with when you became playing for an FA registered club, and is you had to do 3 years before your 18th birthday. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I think a great counter example of it is Eric Dyer, who was always a nightmare because you think, oh, this is great. This guy feels like he's so Spurs through and through. He's been at the club for so long, and then you remember that he was at Sporting in Portugal for the majority of his youth, so he didn't even account for us as far as UEFA homegrown.
And a lot of people thought Ben Davies, being Welsh, they thought, that's got to mean he's a homegrown. It was only after a rule change, I believe, that
Yeah.
he actually became a homegrown player. He was another one which assumed was homegrown, been at Spurs so long, been in the United Kingdom, but no, he wasn't either. So you've got to watch these things as we look at the squad limits, which we'll recap on at the end.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about Semenyo. So why is he so exciting? He's this dribbly winger that everyone keeps talking about.
Yeah, he's a really unique player because he has a pretty unorthodox style of dribbling. He's pretty two-footed, which is great. You can go both sides, which is obviously a huge advantage, both in terms of where we can play him, and then also just fullbacks trying to read him makes things a lot more difficult. He's an unbelievable presser. We've obviously seen Areola's Bournemouth team last season. He works extremely hard. He's 98th percentile for blocks per 90. He jumps out on all the defensive stats, tackles, blocks, clearances. Super significant performances there. He's a really direct to goal approach, kind of like what we've seen from Tell. He's really intent on driving inside and getting a shot away, which is something that can only benefit our team, especially in both transitions and against more defensive teams where we just need someone to take the game by the scruff of the neck for a nice cliche for you there, but yeah, I think he's really versatile in that sense. He's also 6'1", super dominant physically, which is super helpful as far as if we see more long distribution under Thomas Frank by Vicario, kind of going direct to our attackers. I think he'd really benefit from that as well. So yeah, I mean, I think the mooted £60 million fee is an absolute joke, to be honest. I think that's an insane overpay if we do end up going for it. But it's not my money, and if we had him in the squad, it would be super helpful.
Like you say, it's not your money, and the other thing is he comes with the homegrown tax.
Mm-hmm.
There is
totally
a fictional, but also real tax around certain criteria. And people used to say, "Oh, it's the English tax." It's not the English tax.
Mm-hmm.
It's the homegrown and club. Oh, we can't buy club grown. It's the homegrown tax. I was going to say you can't buy club grown, but technically you could buy Kyle Walker-Peters' Tottenham.
Yeah, well, we could
buy a
sign him up for
player.
free, right? He's waiting on a contract right now, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah. Well, we might cover that when we do the defenders one next week.
Yeah, totally.
So there you go. This being the attacker special. Mbuemo is the one everyone's so excited about.
Yep.
Because the rumours are that Man United are a preferred destination. Other people have come out and said that's not the case. But he's got something about him. He's got the history of Thomas Frank. He's got just some fun vibes about him because he's a attacking player once again. He had a great season. He's probably scored against a lot of the clubs that we enjoyed seeing Brentford beat around us in the top six. So that kind of, I say top six, the big six, however you want to call them. So he probably was quite appealing to us, even more so than other players that we hadn't noticed at Brentford who had really good seasons. But do you want to tell us a bit about that player and the stats behind him?
Yeah, I mean, I always think about when Brentford were doing their kickoff glitch thing and that first minute goal he scored with the ridiculous sidewinding volley in the first minute completely sucker punched us. Now, Mbuemo's an unbelievable player. He's outperforming his XG, to be fair, this season, but he has 28 goals and assists, which is ridiculous. I think a decent comparison for him, and not just because they're both African right wingers, but he does kind of have a Salah-esque role in the Brentford team. Obviously, Brentford being a bit more defensive than Liverpool, but in terms of a player that you can leave higher up, go direct into, they'll basically be able to either hold onto the ball until the team gets up the pitch, or take a decisive action and score off the back of it. He's obviously left-footed like Salah as well. It's interesting because if you look at him against other forward players, he really jumps out as far as his passing numbers, sort of playmaking and his progressive passing numbers. And then if you look at him versus wingers, which he did spend a lot of time in that 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1 setup under Frank last season. from there, you really see his expected goals per 90 that he's generating jump up. He's in the 83rd percentile, 0.4 non-penalty goals per 90. So like I said, he's outperforming his XG in comparison to previous seasons. It's always a tricky one there because it's not something that he's expected to sustain. But I do think that the way that Thomas Frank utilized him at Brentford is really, I mean, we know that Thomas Frank can really maximize a player's potential and get the best out of them. So I don't think it's much of a coincidence that he was able to outperform his expected goals by such a significant margin. He's basically doubling his non-penalty expected goals when in terms of translating them into non-penalty goals. He's at 0.2 non-penalty XG per 90 and 0.4 non-penalty goals. So yeah, he's converting at a really high clip this season. Like I said, it's difficult to know how well he'll be able to sustain it, but I think if you only put more quality around a player like that, it's unlikely that they'll stagnate. So
the challenge we have though, isn't it, Max? Also, we have to remove some players to get these players in, because I'm looking at the UEFA squad limits at the moment, and we have one club trained player in our UEFA squad, and that is Brandon Austin. Mm-hmm. So look, they're hard to buy. There's not many we can buy back in that we trained at Spurs, unless you want to go get Harry Winks, Oliver Skipp, and Kyle Walker-Peters back and get the old academy party back together.
Yeah.
Then homegrown, we're at our limit. There's already 4 in there. And then non-homegrown, we've got 18, and the limit is 18. So
yeah,
yes, we have space to potentially bring in the homegrown options. Actually, no, we're at the max as well for homegrown players. So it really is kind of a bit of a one in, one out, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we do have, so like Dragusin, for example, is not a homegrown player. He's still recovering from his ACL injury. We'll probably be able to leave him off the list, at least for the first half of the season. But yeah, to your point, we're pretty much maxed out as far as what we can get away with. We lost Alfie Whiteman, who was a club trained player, and you're maxed out on, I think you only have 2 goalkeepers, and it's 2 goalkeepers in your 25-man squads anyway, so less significant than it would have been for an outfield player. So yeah, we're really looking for one in, one out. We've already signed Tell, so I don't even think he's on this list, which I'll need to update. So that'll put us even, make things even tighter. So we're really looking at, did the likes of Richarlison. Obviously, we've heard lots of rumors banging about for Heung-min Son. We'll have to see how his discussions with Thomas Frank go. But yeah, we're really depending on some movement.
That's why it's not quite as simple as just having loads of great players. You've got to forward plan with your squad and address these limits, because if we went and bought 5 amazing, we bought all these marquee signings. If we want them to be in the Champions League squad, you have to think right now of 5 players that you're going to remove from this squad. I know people would say, but we've already taken into account the obvious players. When you look at the actual squad members that are available that we could move out, there's not many really obvious ones. Sonny, Richarlison are 2 ones that stand out, but in an ideal world, you'd be saying keep those kind of players and remove out what we'd probably harshly describe as dead wood. But there's not much dead wood to move out. You've got to make these brutal decisions, I think, to level up this squad, right? And forward plan. So those spots where we've only got 1 club-trained player out of 4 being Brandon Austin, you want to have 4 really good players in those spots, not a third-choice goalkeeper alone. So, but that comes from buying players very young, registering at the club, and letting them go through this period before, which I think Spurs are trying to do with some players like Vuskovic and others, and Bergvall. That's it. I think, Max, all the players we had covered off. Anything else from you, or see you next week?
Yeah, no, appreciate you having me on, and excited to get through the midfield, the defense, and obviously see who Spurs go for. We've got Lange working in silence right now, as everyone likes to say. So we'll see what happens.
Probably a good sign. Well, up the Spurs.
Up the Spurs.
You sick of podcasts and football shows that